to written questions and in his deposition. And before I go to Bob Franken, I want to make a correction and an apology. I was going by a report we had from last night that said that Representative Tom Allen of Maine was going to be attending his daughter's wedding. I am now told that he was here to vote. Instead, presumably the wedding was postponed, or maybe he's not there. Bob Franken.
Well, the one article of impeachment that's being voted on now is considered one of the weaker ones. It's going to be interesting to see if this prevails. Article 1, the one that just passed, was considered the strongest charge against President Clinton because it had to do with lying before the grand jury under oath. Article 2 has to do with perjury committed in the pursuit of the Paula Jones case, and there you run into the question of materiality, and I'll leave it to Michael to explain that from Black's Law Dictionary, but of course it's based on the fact that the Paula Jones case was ultimately dismissed, and the argument would be that because of that, the perjury was not as easy to prove, not as serious. It'll be most interesting to see if this one prevails and if the fourth article prevails. Those are the two weaker ones.
Well, clearly Michael Gerhardt is more than able and willing and ready to explain that if you so choose. And then I have an historical question for you.
Okay, well thanks for your confidence, Bob. The question of materiality essentially boils down to the following, that the testimony or the lying under oath would have been material if it could have affected or would have affected the outcome of the case. That's the test of materiality.
Historically speaking, I'm thinking that 130 years ago, no radios, no television, few newspapers, it took weeks for people to learn of impeachment here in Washington, and here, zap, around the world. The whole world knows it.
Well, yes, although, to be fair, people certainly did pay a lot of attention to the Johnson impeachment trial, or I should say the House's action with respect to President Johnson, and it was covered thoroughly in all the newspapers. Although I think we should note a couple differences. One of the critical differences is that President Johnson was enormously unpopular. And in fact, the people of the United States, by and large, favored his impeachment, and that gave his impeachment proceedings a whole different dynamic than the one we see before us.
You're already seeing, as we keep an eye on the tally board, a few more Republicans appear to be voting against this article than voted against Article 1. You had 5 Republicans voting against Article 1 at this point, and the vote is only not even halfway through, only a few minutes underway. Already 12 Republicans are casting a vote against.
Well, this is the point that, if you remember, if you were watching the House Judiciary Committee, when Lindsey Graham, a conservative of South Carolina, was the one party member of either party to break ranks when he voted against Article 2 for the reasons basically that Michael Gerhardt has outlined. The judge dismissed the case, said that Clinton's testimony wasn't material in any event, and it just seemed to some people on the Republican side weaker than the no questions asked line in front of a grand jury where there's no question about the importance of that. So we've already now have 16 Republicans who have broken ranks and are voting against this article, and this one, this one may well fail.
And to remind everyone, of course, the obvious, it only takes one article of impeachment passed by the House for a sitting president to be impeached, and President Clinton has been so impeached. And
to trigger a trial in the United States Senate. Bernie, we might note that the language in these articles is pretty rough. I'm just rereading here part of this article in which it says, and in violation of its constitutional duty to take care that the laws be faithfully executed, has willfully corrupted and manipulated the judicial process of the United States for his personal gain and exoneration, impeding the administration of justice.
Are you going to take it?
Quickly now to Baghdad, correspondent Christiane Amanpour.
We're hearing now anti-aircraft artillery fire from close to our positions here in Baghdad. We have not heard what we would have expected to have heard, and that is the sound of incoming attacks. We're simply hearing, over the last few minutes, anti-aircraft artillery opening up in various parts of this city, and we can see the sky fairly lit up with the sight of tracer bullets. The red you can see there, or you can see the sparklings on your night scope camera that we're broadcasting. We have, as I said, just hearing the sound of outgoing fire and not incoming. We are not sure whether there will be any sustained attack like there was last night and the previous nights on Baghdad, but we can say that the Iraqis here are responding in any event to something with their anti-aircraft guns.
Christiane, what can you tell us about the Iraqi government through its vice president a short while ago indicating that Iraq regards UNSCOM as finished, done?
Well, the Vice President, Ramadan, gave a very, very impassioned and angry press conference in which he was asked about UNSCOM, the Weapons Inspection Commission, and he said the issue of UNSCOM, quote, is now in the past. And I quote again, the Commission of Spies is now in the past. Anti-aircraft artillery again, as you heard. He also said that Iraq will resist, quote, to the last citizen to defend its land, its policy, and its dignity. Now, interestingly, he also did admit that the attacks on Iraq have cut communications from the southern part of Iraq to the capital, Baghdad. And this is what he reported. And this is why, apparently, one of the reasons why the leadership of Iraq, before the war started, the day of the air attacks, announced that they had divided Iraq into 4 regional commands, putting loyal lieutenants in charge of each of those regions so that they would be able to independently take care of what they called any resistance or any internal uprisings and disturbances. Internal security, they termed that as. What is also interesting is that we have heard over the last few hours from the British Prime Minister Tony Blair, who announced also that British Tornadoes, the British fighter bombers, are in action against targets in Iraq today. And he said that they have been hitting Republican Guard facilities in southern Iraq, Republican Guard being the elite forces of the Iraqi regime that are now considered to be one of the key arms of keeping this government in power. And also, according to the United States and Britain, not only do they keep this government in office, but, quote, they have their own systems of repression and that they are instrumental in putting together the means of concealing the weapons of mass destruction. These are the words of the British Prime Minister Tony Blair. They are emphasizing, the British, that the Republican Guard is a key target. Now, even though the U.S. officials are saying that the objective of this military attack is not to destabilize the Iraqi regime, clearly by hitting the Republican Guard, and we've heard from the U.S. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Henry Shelton, that barracks have been hit certainly around Baghdad, that there is an element clearly of going after the elite troops that are considered to be those that keep this government in power and that are part of the protection that this government relies on. So this is going to be very interesting to watch and see how it develops. The Iraqi Vice President Ramadan said that in his press conference that there had been civilian casualties, again I quote, 10 times higher than military casualties, although he gave no figures. And that's the latest from here, Bernie.
Okay, Christiane, we're going to keep the picture that we're getting, the live picture from you and our troops and the CNN journalists in Baghdad, and come back to follow what is happening on the House floor before we go to our military advisor, General Richard Neal, the retired Marine Corps general, because we want to put a couple questions to him about something that Christiane just reported. Jeff Greenfield and Michael Gerhardt, it looks like Article 2 is going to go down. Why?
Well, for one thing, 24 Republicans have broken ranks and are voting against Article 2. I think they heard Lindsey Graham, or they followed their own notion this was a relatively weak case. Only 5 Democrats, the same 5 presumably that voted for Article 1, we'll find out later, voted for Article 2. And there are the reason that we talked about earlier is this is a weaker case. The second thing is, if you want to be political about it, this provides some cover for Republicans who can say, look, I'm not a relentless partisan. I voted against an article I thought was weak. The third and most ironic part, of course, is without the Paula Jones case in the first case, there would have been no deposition, there would have been no subsequent grand jury testimony, and now they have decided that the original Paula Jones case deposition is too weak to support an article of impeachment, but he's impeached anyway because of what he did in the grand jury.
And just to follow that up, one should not lose sight of the fact that we're in the midst of a political proceeding. And so the articles don't have to be, the votes on the articles don't have to be consistent. As Jeff pointed out, the first article does make reference to false statements made in the Paula Jones case. Nevertheless, the votes here seem to be against the second article. And so we see a kind of compromise being made by most members of the House with respect to this second article.
The point you just made about this article giving Republicans cover, correspondent John King at the White House also dittos that, and the point being the Republicans can say that this is not just about sex.
Well, that's right. By the way, the Article 2 has now failed. There are now 220 votes recorded against it. 25 Republicans voted against it. Only 5 Democrats voting for it. And it is indeed a way of saying, look, we told you that we weren't just talking about sex. So what he did in the Paula Jones case, we don't think he should be impeached for that. But when you get to a grand jury and you swear an oath, that is another way to say this is something that this is about the rule of law, not about some tawdry sexual matter. But I just have to observe very quickly that to realize the immense constitutional step we are taking from what was originally a case involving the governor of Arkansas and a $5 or $6 an hour employee is absolutely staggering.
Also staggering what is happening on the left side, the upper side of your television screen. About 8 minutes ago, correspondent Christiane Amanpour, reporting live from Baghdad, noted that Iraqi anti-aircraft batteries came to life again. At one point in her report, there was a single shot fired from one of the batteries, obviously trying to hit something. And you can see from the tracers going up that things are still happening. We'll continue to monitor things there. General Richard Neal, Christiane reported something that was very, very interesting. At a news conference earlier today, Baghdad time, Iraqi Vice President Taha Yassin Ramadan said that the attacks have cut communications between southern Iraq and Baghdad. And Christiane also quoted him as saying a bit later that civilian casualties are 10 times higher than military casualties. Your assessment?
Those are interesting figures that Christiane gave us. Of course, there's no way that we can corroborate those figures and give them any validity, but I think there's something that has to make us all pause for concern. I think the United States and the British have told us on more than one occasion that they have really worked to the nth degree to try to avoid any collateral damage and more specifically, any civilian casualties. I think we're going to have to wait and sort that out as more data becomes available.
Would you expect, based on your sources, that any attacks tonight would be less intense than they were Friday night, Washington time?
I think what you'll see is probably less attacks in and around Baghdad. From my sources, I think they've felt that the forces have probably attacked all of the targets in that general vicinity to the satisfaction from a bomb damage assessment point of view. I think there's a lot more attacks going on either west, east, or south of Baghdad, and perhaps even north up near Tikrit. We don't pick them up on our monitor, but I can just see that from my discussions with some of these folks that there is still a full night's effort, although
okay,
I think it'll be curtailed.
Can I ask a question, General Neal?
Yes, Christiane.
Can you tell us what we're hearing now increasingly from the British side and other reports coming out of the United States that in fact the Republican Guards are a main target? Can you tell us what you know about whether barracks are being hit, what is happening in terms of the Republican Guards and targeting them and targeting soldiers in their barracks, etc.?
I think, Christiane, you're right what you're hearing. I think there has been a focused effort on the Republican Guard forces. My speculation, or I'm assuming from my studies of the area, is that most likely the rationale behind hitting these barracks is, number one, obviously to deter them from protecting the regime And at the same time, these are the best fed, best equipped, best housed troops. But they also are the ones that seem to suffer the attacks all the time whenever, in fact, we go to a war footing, or the United States goes to a war footing. So I'm assuming that they may say, perhaps they're going to try turn the table, so to speak, and maybe the Republican Guards, who are the strongest, maybe they could turn them against the regime.
They also are the best paid,
Is that
too.
a key object?
Sorry, Christian, please continue.
Is that a key objective, as far as you know, General Neal, what you just reported?
No, it's not speculation. It's not an objective. It's from my discussions with folks without them coming up and saying this is an objective. I think you've heard comments about wanting to replace the regime. The opposition parties out there, as you have reported and as we have reported over the last 3 or 4 days, are in sort of there's
on
three
this
or four
vote, the yeas are 205, the nays are 229. Article 2 is not adopted, and the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. The question is on the adoption of Article 3. All those in favor will say aye. Aye. Those opposed will say no. No. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. Gentleman from New York.
On that, I would ask for the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are ordered. All those in favor?
All in favor of the yeas and nays will rise.
All in favor of the yeas and nays will rise. Sufficient number having arisen. The yeas and nays are ordered by electronic device. This will be a 15-minute vote on Article 3.
Just to come back to what Illinois Republican Ray LaHood said, if I heard the vote correctly, the House of Representatives has just voted to defeat Impeachment Article 2. The vote 229 to 205 is what I heard him say. They now have are moving on to a vote now, a full vote on Article 3. I want to get back to something that Christian... Judy, do you have something?
I was just going to say,
Yes.
just quickly, Bernie, Article 3 is the one that charges the president with obstructing justice in an effort to delay, impede, cover up, and conceal the existence of evidence directly related to the Paula Jones case.
We had to interrupt General Neal and Christian Amanpour. The discussion was the Iraqi Republican Guards, and I just wanted to say that you might recall that yesterday at about 6 o'clock Eastern Time, Friday evening, CNN interviewed Judy and I, Defense Secretary William Cohen, and he was asked specific questions. I don't want to misquote the Secretary, but he did speak specifically about the Republican Guard, and I'm scrambling to find my notes, and probably we're trying to find that tape. General Neal.
That's right. You recall on Friday evening when you did interview Secretary Cohen, he did talk about the Republican Guards as being one of the targets, and for the reasons that I spoke to a few seconds ago. Basically, they provide security and sustainment for the regime. So it'll be interesting to see what the impact will be on this attack against the Republican Guards, who have been attacked in 1991 and twice in 1993.
As we try to follow these two extraordinary stories, the one in Iraq, the one on the floor of the House of Representatives, we want to take you to the White House, where Wolf Blitzer has just spoken with the minister who was with the president as the first article of impeachment was voted against President Clinton. Wolf?
Judy, we just had a chance now briefly to speak with the minister, Tony Kampala. He was walking by our position here on the north lawn of the White House, leaving the White House. He told us that he was in the Oval Office with President Clinton when this vote was going on. The president was not watching television, although one would have assumed he might be watching that historic moment. He was not watching television. Instead, he was praying with Tony Kampala. Tony Kampala described the president's mood this way. He said, quote, "I think he's tired. He's very upbeat and confident that things will work out, but he's very tired." So Tony Kampala praying with the president during this historic vote. We're also told that the Democratic leaders of the House will come over here to meet with the president in the residence of the White House behind me after the fourth vote is completed. The fourth article of impeachment vote is completed. Later, the president and the Democratic leaders will emerge from the residence, go to the south lawn of the White House to make statements, obviously statements that are designed to show that the president is not going to resign, that they still support the president. They want it to continue and move on with the work of the nation. But once again, the president did not watch the vote. He's fully aware of the vote. did not watch the vote. Instead, he was praying with his minister, Tony Campolo.
Wolf, do we know who else is with the president this afternoon as these votes are taking place? Do we know if the First Lady, if their daughter Chelsea Clinton is there?
I don't know that. We assume the First Lady has come back here and is here. I don't know about Chelsea Clinton, but the only thing that we do know is Tony Campolo definitely was here with the president during this historic moment. The president and Tony Campolo have had a long-standing relationship. They've become friendly over the years, especially at those Renaissance weekends, New Year's Eve in Hilton Head, South Carolina. He's from Philadelphia. He's a very fiery, passionate minister who's had a tremendous impact on the president during what the president has described as this healing process in the aftermath of his confession of his adulterous affair with Monica Lewinsky in August.
I'm just curious, Wolf, what denomination is he?
He's Protestant, and he's almost evangelical, but he's known as more of a liberal minister, very, very well known in the Philadelphia area, especially for his sermons, which are extremely passionate. President Clinton has been very much influenced by the way Tony Campolo has spoken out. They got to know each other again during those Renaissance weekends down in Hilton Head.
Talking about the president as we watch the vote count, as you can see, a little over 10 minutes left in this vote on the article, the third article of impeachment against the president. Article 1, testifying falsely before a grand jury, passed. Article 2 went down to defeat. That was perjury before in the Paula Jones deposition. This now is Article 3, charging the president with obstructing justice. Jeff Greenfield, you were going to say you talked with the president, this minister, not long ago.
Not the president. I talked with, as it happens, quite independently of this. I was moderating a panel on which Tony Campolo was on, and what's interesting is his passion about personal responsibility, about materialism. Some of the themes the president cited in his 1992 campaign, in his inaugural speeches, and in some of his best speeches as president. An obvious irony here, given what got him into this mess, but that is the special passion that Minister Campolo has when he talks about the fact that we're drowning in a sea of materialism, that consumerism is a threat to our future, and that we have to get back to fundamental values.
Speaking about what is happening now, they're working on Article 3 on the floor. CNN producer Mike Rosselli sends word. We got a bit of this from correspondent Bob Franken, who we're going to go back to in just a second, but Rosselli just did a walkabout on the Plaza of the Capitol on the east side. He reports that all the galleries inside are full, but outside there are large crowds, and he notes that the line to get into the Capitol building is longer than the line at the National Art Gallery for the Vincent van Gogh works on display. Bob Franken?
Well, you know, that's actually quite a change from yesterday, where it was the other way around. Everybody here apparently is interested in seeing history being made, and it is. I wanted to talk to you about Article 3, obstruction of justice. This one is one of the two that they thought might pass. This is not considered as strong a charge as Article 1, which of course has passed. This is the one that provided pretty much the fodder for independent counsel Ken Starr's investigation. This includes the charge that there was an effort to hide the gifts that involved the president's personal secretary, Betty Curry. This is the one that charges that, in fact, the president tried to get Betty Curry to change her mind. This is the one that charges that there were efforts to get Monica Lewinsky a job to be quiet. This, as I said, is the one that has provided much of what we have learned about this case throughout the year as the independent counsel has conducted his investigation. As I said, this is somewhere in the middle in terms of strength. This is going to be very interesting to watch. Given the results on the second one, many people now believe that the fourth one may also go down.
You just anticipated my next question, Bob, to jump ahead to Article 4, which is?
That is the one where it is charged that the president, in fact, was abusing his office because of the 81 answers he provided to Congress to the questions the Judiciary Committee sent to him. They say that among those answers were examples of perjury. That, as a matter of fact, he in fact lied under oath when he responded to the congressional inquiry into whether he should be impeached. Many people are very, very uncomfortable with that. That is considered one of the weaker ones.
And what happens after the fourth and final article is voted on? Wolf Blitzer gave us a feeling for what we could expect down at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, but what happens up there?
Well, first they have to have another vote, and that will be to appoint the managers. The managers, in effect, are the team of prosecutors sent by the House of Representatives over to prosecute the trial that would be held in the Senate. Henry Hyde, who's the Judiciary Committee chairman, will be heading that. There will be, I believe, 13 members. It's going to include many of the members of the Judiciary Committee. Then, very quietly, the articles of impeachment themselves will be transported across the Capitol over to the Secretary of the Senate. There was some speculation that the Senate would actually have to come into session to receive them. It was decided that that was not the case. I think that decision may have had a little bit of expedience connected to it, since we're at a season where there are no senators around.
Just a quick note of history, Bob and Bernie. I'm looking back at what the text of the articles of impeachment were that were voted on not by the entire House, but by the House Judiciary Committee against President Nixon. And of course, one of those was an article alleging obstruction of justice. Now, the details are very, very different, but at least in this sense, if this article were to pass, and right now the numbers are getting close, we're not there yet, it's at 211 and they need 218, President Clinton would have at least one dubious distinction that he would share with President Richard Nixon. In the Nixon instance, the Judiciary Committee also passed a second article alleging abuse of power, and as we've just been saying, that is the text of the fourth article, which will be voted on against President Clinton.
And Bob Franken, I'm concerned that somewhere around the world, someone might be turning on CNN for the first time. We obviously are reporting to you on the voting of the articles of impeachment, but Bob, this day began with some utterly surprising news involving Bob Livingston of Louisiana.
Well,
Will you bring us up to date on that?
Bob Livingston of Louisiana had been nominated by his party to be the new Speaker of the House, and in fact had been running things, in effect had taken over as Speaker. A couple of days ago, Livingston in fact had to admit, because of an investigation, that he had had some affairs during his marriage. There had been a couple of days that had been spent debating that. Today, on the floor, with no warning to just about anybody, Livingston, calling for President Clinton to resign, said, "I will be an example." Livingston said, "I am going to resign. I am not going to stand for Speaker, and in fact, 6 months after the new Congress comes in, I will step aside." Of course, that just totally startled everybody and caused an entire debate to intensify about whether President Clinton should call it quits also. So that was going on. It almost overshadowed for a while this history-making impeachment vote. Bernie?
Which is underway on Article 3 right now.
Article 3, the obstruction of justice count. May I make one point about Article 4? Originally, that included any number of acts that were not considered illegal. There were the charges that President Clinton had misled his staff, that he had in fact misled the American people, and that all of that constituted abuse of power. Last week, the Judiciary Committee Republicans were uncomfortable with that. They considered it such a weak case, they got rid of all the parts of that charge except the illegalities they believe occurred in the 81 answers.
Jeff, as you come in...
I just wanted to very quickly say something, that the obstruction of justice article, which appears that it is going to pass very narrowly, although I should hold and say, let's make sure. The problem with this article, unlike Article 2, is that the evidence is more circumstantial. In other words, Article 2 failed because a lot of Republicans thought that didn't rise to the level of an impeachable offense. If the Republicans had believed that there was harder evidence that the president had in fact tampered with witnesses and tried to get people to change testimony, it probably would have passed by a much larger margin, and I suspect even some more Democrats would have joined it. It was the nature of the evidence rather than the charge itself that made this one so close.
If I may point out, Jeff's point is excellent, that to the extent that if in fact there is a Senate trial, the passage of the obstruction of justice with its circumstantial evidence would almost certainly mean that the witnesses who've been the principals in this case would be called to testify in public before the Senate. That would include Monica Lewinsky, Linda Tripp, Betty Curry, possibly Vernon Jordan.
And Bob Franken, procedurally, tell us why these articles are being voted on in such pell-mell fashion with no more debate.
I'm sorry, Bernie, I had some noise and I couldn't hear. May I ask you to ask the question again?
Procedurally, tell us why these article votes are being taken in such pell-mell fashion with no more debate.
Because the debate is over. As a matter of fact, it really was over when the Democrats put in their motion to recommit, which of course was a way to debate the censure resolution. As soon as that went down, then it was time to move on to the prevailing business, which is the articles of impeachment. They could have been voted on as one impeachment resolution with 4 sections to it. But of course, everybody had agreed that it should be divided, to use the term they use up here, so each article could be voted separately. That's what's going on now, but they're really voting on one resolution divided into 4 articles of impeachment.
The number has just gone to 219.
So it's
the
passed.
Third article is passed. This is the article accusing the president of obstruction of justice. This is now the second article passed. It is the third in a long. And I'm reminded by our CNN President Rick Kaplan that that's assuming no one changes their mind, changes their vote. There still is a little over a minute left for them to do that. Not likely, but possible. Michael Gerhardt, you look like you want to jump in here.
Well, I think one of the things to keep in mind with respect to this third article, and we're assuming but not yet certain it will pass, given the apparent tally, is that I think of all the articles, this was the one most self-consciously crafted after the articles that had been approved by the House Judiciary Committee against President Nixon. And we heard a lot of discussion in the statements from the members of Congress, particularly on the Republican side during the debate over the last couple of days, about how President Clinton's obstruction was quite similar to President Nixon's. And there's been a very conscious effort on the part of the Republicans to use similar language, to make similar charges, to really make this the Democratic analog to Nixon.
And why would they do that, Jeff?
Because they're trying, again, for months, really, we've had the same argument in one sense. It's only about sex. It doesn't rise to the level of impeachable offense. Oh, you're wrong, say the Republicans. This is about the rule of law. It's about serious tampering with the whole justice process. The more you can make this sound like a Richard Nixon attempt to obstruct justice, the more serious and weighty it sounds, the more impeachable it sounds.
And now that this second article has passed, let's go to the White House to CNN's John King.
Judy, obviously another defeat for the president, but these past almost 11 months now, as we've discussed the whole Monica Lewinsky story, often the political advice has competed with the legal advice, the president's lawyers sparring with his political advisors. Some irony here, as Jeff Greenfield has been discussing, the president's lawyers from a legal standpoint.
The yeas are 221.
Let's go back to the floor.
The nays are 212. Article 3 is adopted, and the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table.
Go ahead, John.
What I was thinking.
The House will be in order.
Feel confident about defending, number one, the perjury charging Article 1 that passed and the obstruction of justice allegations here. The president's lawyers feel they have
the question occurs on Article 4. So many R's in favor will say aye. Those opposed. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, on that I request a recorded vote.
The yeas and nays are requested. So many are in favor. The yeas and nays will stand and remain standing. A sufficient number having arisen. The yeas and nays are ordered. This will be an electronic vote for 15 minutes on Article 4.
Which the members are now beginning to vote on, charges the president with repeatedly engaging in conduct that resulted in misuse and abuse of his high office. And to read from this line here, President misused and abused his office by making perjurious, false, and misleading statements in his written responses to Congress. The article itself goes on to say, impair the due and proper administration of justice and the conduct of legal inquiries, and contravene the laws governing the integrity of the judicial and legislative branches and the truth-seeking purpose of coordinate investigative proceedings. Some pretty tough language, Jeff.
Yeah, this is another one. I suppose if we had legalized gambling in Washington, we could be betting on these articles. This is another one where the chances of passage are seen to be dubious because they charge the president with asserting privileges for the sake of covering up, and for those famous or infamous 81 answers to the written questions. And there are some even on the Republican side who have said, gee, you know, asserting a privilege may not be impeachable. We know that one of the Democrats who voted for the first 3 articles, McHale of Pennsylvania, has said he will not vote for Article 4.
Well, you already see, what are they, just a minute or so into the vote, and already 37 or so Republicans are voting no.
Yep.
Which is a sign it may not pass.
Oh, I'd say it's
probably won't pass.
Yeah.
And initially, this Article 2 was crafted after an article that had been approved by the House Judiciary Committee against President Nixon. The particular charge against President Nixon was he refused to comply with the subpoena from the House for certain information relating to the substance of the investigation against him by the House. But much of the similar language has been actually dropped by amendment, and instead we're left primarily with the president's answers to the 81 questions. And the theory behind this article is that by giving the answers that he did, the president somehow abused his power. He abused his power, the article charges, by somehow appropriating the power of the House to impeach.
Judy, already 50 Republicans have voted no with their electronic cards. I think we can, I don't want to jump the gun here, but I think we can pretty safely say this is not going to pass.
Wasn't this the article, just quickly, Bernard, that the Republican counsel on the Judiciary Committee felt so strongly about at one point?
The Republican counsel felt strongly about
all of them.
Many things. If you remember David Schiffer's very almost steamy and incendiary, or at least angry testimony. But this was the one about which there was more expression of doubt than at any time. And we're almost there at the point where, again, to listen to our President Merck Kaplan, unless people suddenly change their mind en masse, this is going down to substantial defeat. This will be the biggest margin, pro or con, I think, of any of the 4 articles.
From this microanalysis, let's step back for a moment and go back to our people at the White House, John King and Wolf Blitzer. The president now has been impeached on 2 counts, Articles 1 and 3. The House is completing action on Article 4. The White House is girding for the United States Senate trial. But the fact of the matter is, as long as he's alive and as long as there are history books, William Jefferson Clinton will be mentioned as the 42nd president who was impeached.
It will be obviously a black mark. It will be a very, very huge embarrassment on this second-term president who thought he was going to be spending the rest of his time polishing up his legacy, balancing the budget, international issues, working to try to do something in these last 2 years on Social Security. I would like to point out on that first article that has been passed that he committed perjury during his testimony before the grand jury. If it comes down to a trial in the Senate, David Schippers, the Republican chief investigative counsel on the Judiciary Committee, he backed up that claim that the president lied under oath before the grand jury by pointing to the president's testimony that he was telling absolutely the truth back in January in the Paula Jones deposition when he denied sexual relations as defined by the Paula Jones lawyers. If it comes down to a trial, Bernie and Judy, it's going to, the final argument on that perjury count is going to be whether or not the president touched certain parts of Monica Lewinsky's body with an intent to arouse, as she claims, versus what he says he didn't do so. It could be a really, really gruesome, ugly trial involving the most intimate sexual acts if it comes down to a trial in the Senate on that first count.
But those would be the facts at issue, would they not?
Those would be the facts at issue, and the president didn't answer directly when he was asked by the independent counsel prosecutors here at the White House in August whether or not he touched certain parts of Monica Lewinsky's body. He simply referred back to his opening statement that day in which he said he told the truth when he denied having sexual relations as he understood the term to be to mean as defined by the Paula Jones lawyers. And she has testified, Monica Lewinsky, that the president did touch certain parts of her body with an intent to arouse. So it's come back to that whole issue of sex.
Okay, Wolf, I would just observe that it would seem to me if the men and women of the United States Senate can handle matters of war and peace, here is Secretary Cohen at the Pentagon with a briefing.
As you know, the United States and British strikes against Iraq are continuing. From the beginning of this operation, we've been careful to set realistic goals. We've also been careful not to either overstate or exaggerate the results as our intelligence analysts study the very preliminary data. However, I want to stress that this military action is substantial. It is inflicting significant damage on the 7 target categories that we have selected. And these are as follows: Iraq's air defense system, the command and control system that Saddam Hussein uses to direct his military and to repress his people, the security forces and facilities to protect and hide his efforts to develop or maintain the deadly chemical and biological weapons. These are the forces that have worked to prevent the United Nations inspectors from doing their jobs. The industrial base that Saddam Hussein uses to sustain and deliver his deadly weapons. His military infrastructure, including the elite Republican Guard forces that pose the biggest threat to his neighbors and protect his weapons of mass destruction programs. The airfields, and a refinery that produces oil products that Iraq smuggles in violation of economic sanctions. I'd like to focus on 2 areas where our strikes have substantially degraded Saddam Hussein's warfighting capability. The first is Iraq's ability to deliver deadly weapons. We estimate that Saddam's missile program has been set back by at least a year. And I'd like to offer just another word pertaining to descriptions of damage done. When we talk about moderate damage inflicted, I think that has to be kept in mind in terms of its comparison. When the federal building in Oklahoma City was bombed, the initial photographs, satellite photography that had taken place, described that damage as being moderate. I think we all understand how much damage was in fact done to that building, even though it was described as moderate at that time. The elimination of the ability to deliver these deadly weapons is one of the jobs that Saddam's security forces prevented the UN inspectors from performing. So the second area where the damage has been substantial is the command and control system. This network of communications, intelligence, propaganda, and security service headquarters has been significantly damaged. Saddam may rebuild and attempt to rebuild some of this military infrastructure in the future, just as he has replaced many facilities, including lavish palaces after Desert Storm. But we have diminished his ability to threaten his neighbors with both conventional and non-conventional weapons. In closing, I want to again call attention to the superior performance of both the United States and British forces. This action demonstrates the quality of the men and women we have in the military. They are well trained, they are well equipped, they are well led, and we owe them a great deal of gratitude. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As the Secretary noted, we are very pleased with the results of the operation thus far. In the primary areas of concern, facilities that support Saddam's weapons of mass destruction capabilities, his command and control, and the security forces associated with these weapons, we have had significant success in our airstrikes. However, it does appear that we've got to do a better job of translating the arcane science of battle damage assessment into plain English so that you can all relay the information more effectively to the public. So the burden is on us. The burden is to make a complex subject more understandable. On the plus side, as you will see in just a few minutes when Admiral Wilson briefs, I believe the numbers themselves are clearer today because we've had additional time to conduct our assessments. Let me take just a moment here to give you a flavor of what we call battle damage assessment. This first photograph is of the electronics plant. Here you can see 3 different impacts. The one on the left, our analysts assess as moderately damaged. The one here on the bottom, we assessed as destroyed, and I think you can see why. Basically, it's been rubbled. The last one on the upper right, you can see the crater near the corner of this building. Our analysts assessed this impact as having produced light damage. But to put this in perspective, I'll show you some other facilities where we saw explosions outside of buildings that were much smaller than the explosions caused by this weapon. Give me a second photo. I'm sure you recognize these as our 2 embassies, the one in Tanzania, the one in Kenya. As you can see, when you have a chance to get a different angle or a ground view, your sense of damage can be quite different. Our analysts classified this damage as light to moderate when all they had was overhead imagery to go by. Again, here's the Taji Missile Repair Facility. It contains a series of buildings, but we only went after selected targets within the compound based on intelligence as to which ones had elements that were critical to the process. This one was assessed as moderate damage, as was this one. This one was assessed as severe damage, and so on. My point is, none of these buildings within this compound were assessed as destroyed, not even one. Our analysts are appropriately very conservative in their initial assessments, as I think you would agree in this particular facility. But in my view, this facility will not be usable for Saddam's efforts to maintain or improve his missile capabilities in the years ahead. I'd also like to point out, as you can see, many of the buildings in this facility appear to be undamaged. And the reason for that is because they were not targeted. We only went after specific buildings within the compound, again, ones that were related to our mission objectives. I'll leave the rest of the details to Admiral Wilson. To sum up, I am very pleased with the results of our strikes. The plan is being executed with precision and success. Before we take your questions, let me update you for just a second on the status of our operation right now. As you know, U.S. and British forces are again striking targets in Iraq as we speak. To update last night's actions, all of our pilots and our air crews returned safely from yesterday's airstrikes. We conducted approximately 150 combat and combat support sorties last night over Iraq, as well as some additional Tomahawk and air-launched cruise missile attacks. While the Iraqis have not aggressively employed their substantial surface-to-air missile systems, we have encountered heavy anti-aircraft fire. Finally, I'd like to say again that we can all be proud of the way our men and women in uniform have carried out their assigned mission. They are superb professionals, as are those that are right now in the crisis response force that are starting to deploy even as the holidays approach. And I might add, as are all the members of our armed forces. My thanks go out to them and their families. Thank you.
General, can I ask, you told us before that I believe 70 targets have hit. How many targets have now been hit? And, Mr. Secretary, are we nearing the end of these raids?
We're up in the 90s right now.
In the
targets, numbers of targets struck.
And Mr. Secretary, are we drawing close to the end of this?
Well, the operation is going to continue until the President decides that it has been completed, and so it's still underway.
General, excuse me, sir. It would be very helpful, certainly to me, and maybe some of my colleagues might ease some of this confusion. If you could give us, and you did in a sense, gave us the number of missiles in that they were more than were fired during the Persian Gulf War, but if you can give us a percentage as it's analyzed of successful strikes, and also the percentage of the manned air crews with their smart bombs, dumb bombs versus the percentage, so we can get a batting average here of how well we're really doing. I mean, this is helpful, but it doesn't tell us the full story.
Well, all of that will come out as part of the post-analysis that we're doing. Right now, I know the numbers of missiles fired, I know the numbers of sorties, but in terms of specific ones that have gone against each target, that'll require a lot more detail than I could give you right now, and we will provide that later on.
Follow-up. Can you give us then, sir, if you would, the number of missiles to date, including last night's raid that have been fired? We understand that missiles were fired both from, as you say, aircraft and ships. Do they include the new carrier battle group that's in the Persian Gulf?
The new carrier battle group in the Persian Gulf is capable. It's combat ready. It's perfectly capable of participating in the strike, but because it's an ongoing operation, I will not comment on whether or not it has been employed as of this point. And in terms of the exact numbers of missiles, as I said,
we are watching the House of Representatives' final vote on the fourth and final article before them, and it has gone down to defeat. With no time shown left on the clock, the vote is 285 against, 148. Going back now to the Pentagon, where the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Hugh Sheldon, and Defense Secretary William Cohen are briefing reporters.
In this operation that you believe has stopped Saddam Hussein from actually attacking his neighbors. Was he very close to using these unmanned vehicles, supposedly, to spew some chemical weaponry anywhere?
Well, that's always been one of our concerns, to the extent that he would have so-called UAVs, or take aircraft that could be loaded with a chemical and then launched on an unmanned basis into one of his neighboring countries, has always been of a concern.
Going back now to the House floor, Judy.
That's right, Bernie. They're going to announce the results and move on to the next order of business.
Some members would like to leave here sooner rather than later. Gentleman from Illinois.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Pursuant to Clause 2A1 of Rule 9, I hereby give notice of my intention to offer a resolution which raises a question of the privileges of the House. The form of the resolution is as follows. Resolved that Mr. Hyde, Mr. Sensenbrenner, Mr. McCullum, Mr. Geekus, Mr. Kennedy, Mr. Booyer, Mr. Bryant, Mr. Shabbat, Mr. Barr, Mr. Hutchinson, Mr. Cannon, Mr. Rogan, and Mr. Graham are appointed managers to conduct the impeachment trial against William Jefferson Clinton, President of the United States, that a message be sent to the Senate to inform the Senate of these appointments, and that the manager so appointed may, in connection with the preparation and conduct of the trial, exhibit the articles of impeachment to the Senate and take all other actions necessary, which may include the following. 1. Employing legal, clerical, and other necessary assistance and incurring such other expenses as may be necessary to be paid from amounts available to the Committee on the Judiciary under applicable expense resolutions or from the applicable accounts of the House of Representatives. 2. Sending for persons and papers and filing with the Secretary of the Senate on part of the House of Representatives any pleadings in conjunction with or subsequent to the exhibition of the articles of impeachment that the managers consider necessary.
The resolution offered by the gentleman from Illinois is a question of the privileges of the House. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois to proceed immediately on the resolution. Well, under the previous order of the House, the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Hyde, will control 5 minutes, and the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Conyers, will control 5 minutes.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't...
The clerk will report the resolution.
I don't need a lot of time. What he's going to say.
House Resolution 614 resolved that Mr. Hyde, Mr. Sensenbrenner, Mr. McCollum, Mr. Geekus, Mr. Kennedy, Mr. Booyer, Mr. Bryant, Mr. Shabbat, Mr. Barr, Mr. Hutchinson, Mr. Cannon, Mr. Rogan, and Mr. Graham are appointed managers to conduct the impeachment trial against William Jefferson Clinton, President of the United States. That a message be sent to the Senate to inform the Senate of these appointments, and that the manager so appointed may, in connection with the preparation and the conduct of the trial, exhibit the articles of impeachment to the Senate and take all other actions necessary, which may include the following. 1. Employing legal, clerical, and other necessary assistance and incurring such other expenses as may be necessary to be paid from amounts available to the Committee on the Judiciary under applicable expense resolutions or from the applicable accounts of
what Henry Hyde, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, has just done is named 13 Republican members of the House Judiciary Committee who he says should serve as managers for the impeachment articles as they come up for trial in the United States Senate. This is a procedure that we knew was coming. What we did not know was the identity of the individuals who will be the managers. Henry Hyde naming clearly members he's been working with over a period of months on these impeachment issues. And this comes directly on the heels of the House of Representatives having passed 2 articles of impeachment against President Clinton. The first article being perjury before a grand jury, and the other article having to do with obstruction of justice. Let's go back to the floor. This is John Conyers, Democrat of Michigan.
There needs to be a lot of discussion about this. We choose not to be a part of the managers in the Senate, and I am going to vote against the motion.
Yield back his time then?
And I yield the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Illinois yield back?
Yes, sir.
Gentleman from Illinois yields back.
Here you go.
All time for debate has expired. Pursuant to the previous order of the House, the previous question is ordered. The question is on adoption of the resolution. All those in favor will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. The ayes have it. The resolution is agreed to.
Mr. Speaker,
roll call, please.
Michigan.
Mr.
May we have a
Gentleman
recorded vote?
Mr. Speaker, on that I demand the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. All in favor stand and remain standing. Sufficient number having arisen. The yeas and nays are ordered. This will be a 15-minute vote by electronic device.
The members of the House will now vote yes or no on whether 13 Republicans will serve as managers of this trial that is to take place in the United States Senate. As you heard, Chairman Henry Hyde of the Judiciary Committee named 13 Republicans from the committee, members all familiar with these issues. The Democrats rose in the person of John Conyers of Michigan. He's the ranking Democrat on that committee, saying we don't want any part of this. We choose not to be a part of the managers in the Senate, and we're not going to participate in this. And we've just been handed a statement by Trent Lott, who's the Senate Republican leader, which I think we want to get to. But before we do, Jeff Greenfield, you were going to comment.
One very quick point, but that might be significant. It is generally agreed that when the new Congress comes into session next month, they will have to reappoint the managers. And we know there are fewer Republicans in the House next year than there are now. There will be fewer. Had this vote been closer, there was some question about whether this whole impeachment process could have been stopped dead by the simple failure of the House to reappoint managers. But given the margin of this vote, it now seems likely that new managers will be appointed, or rather the same managers will be reappointed when the Congress reconvenes in January.
When you have a different breakdown of Republicans and Democrats. I'm not going to read the whole statement from the Senate Republican leader Trent Lott, but as I turn to Bob Franken at the Capitol, Bob, I just would let our viewers know that Senator Lott is saying senators will be prepared to fulfill their constitutional obligations. He goes on to say there are steps that precede the beginning of an impeachment trial. Once the Senate is organized as an impeachment proceeding, there will be pleadings and motions that come before the taking of evidence. And he says that makes it difficult at this time to determine when an actual trial will begin. That timing will depend greatly on the president and his lawyers. Bob Franken.
Well, several things. First of all, to supplement what Jeff was saying a moment ago, the managers are really prosecutors. The chief prosecutor is Henry Hyde, and the rest are his assistant prosecutors. There is the feeling that if for some reason the dynamic of all this changes, and they are not reappointed by the new Congress, then in fact, if they're not reappointed, impeachment would be blocked. Now, Jeff spoke a moment ago, or Senator Lott did, about this preliminary stage. Think of that as a pre-trial area, and that is considered the time when the president could, to use the legal parlance, cop a plea. That is to say, agree to some sort of censure resolution.
Let's go now to Wolf Blitzer at the White House.
They're gearing up for the arrival very soon of a lot of House Democrats. It's going to be a pep rally. They're going to be driving in, we're told, here along Pennsylvania Avenue, which is normally shut down to traffic. They'll be coming into the north side of the White House, going into the residence for a private meeting with President Clinton. Perhaps the First Lady will be there as well. Then they will all emerge through the south portico on the south side of the White House on the south lawn, and they will speak about what has happened. Clearly a stinging blow to the president that 2 articles of impeachment have now been forwarded, will be forwarded to the Senate, potentially for a trial unless some last-minute compromise can be worked out, something short of impeachment involving censure, which of course is what the president wants. But at this stage, the Senate is going to begin getting ready for a full-scale trial.
And Bob Franken, conversely, with what the Democrats are planning to surround and try to buck up their party leader, what are the Republicans planning this afternoon?
Well, they're trying to end their disarray, which of course was caused this morning when the man who was going to be Speaker, Bob Livingston, suddenly announced with no warning that he would be resigning, calling on President Clinton to do the same thing. That, of course, the result of a bombshell a couple of nights ago when he went to the Republicans and said, I'm about to be publicized for having had some relationships outside my marriage. And so now the Republicans...
Well, our apology for the audio gremlins we're having, and we'll try to clean that up. Frankly, it's not surprising that we're having a little bit of difficulty on this day, what with everything going on and lots of communications gear all around and the inclement weather. You saw the electrical hit we took a couple hours ago, so we're still going very strongly, and we'll continue to get back to Bob Franken as soon as possible. Wolf Blitzer, if you are still there, has the president been working on the remarks he will make?
Yes, the president of course, always gets a draft of a speech from his speechwriters, but he spends a lot of time revising them. And we will be listening very carefully to what he says. Remember, just before he left for the Middle East, which seems like a long time ago, last Friday, so it hasn't been a long time ago, only about 8 days or so ago, the president did come into the Rose Garden and make that last-minute appeal for censure, saying he would support censure, appealing against impeachment. He spent a lot of personal time on those remarks, which didn't necessarily help him. In fact, some believe it hurt him because he didn't come more bluntly out and say, yes, he did lie, not necessarily that he committed perjury, but that he did lie. The president spends a lot of time working on these remarks, and these will be very personal remarks from him, designed to show that he has no intention of stepping down. Most White House officials are convinced he will not step down. The only reason he would ever step down, some of the president's closest advisors and supporters have suggested, if at some point down the road the top Democratic leadership in the Senate were to come to him and say, Mr. President, you're going down, there's going to be a conviction in the Senate, it's a good time to resign. But at this point, that does not seem to be at all in the cards.
But Wolf, with the prospect of a Senate trial, how important will be the tone of what the president says?
It will be very important because the tone that he puts forward right now in the next hour or two, whenever he does emerge from this private meeting with the House Democrats, that tone will set the stage for the immediate period ahead for the White House defense. The Senate strategy, as they call it, is going to be very aggressive, and they're going to try to bring in some additional firepower. And the president's been talking with the former Senate Majority Leader George Mitchell, who's now, of course, retired, was deeply involved in negotiating the peace agreement in Northern Ireland. But the president is looking for some additional help to get him through this next crisis.
Of course, Mr. Mitchell is highly respected in that body, the senior chamber, because he too was a former Senate Majority Leader.
Very respected. He's got a lot of friends over there. He knows how the Senate operates. And one of the problems that the president has had in dealing with the House and the Senate, as Leon Panetta said yesterday on CNN in an interview you conducted with him, was that the president has not established those kinds of close personal connections, personal ties with many lawmakers here in Washington that normally are so essential in helping a president during this kind of crisis.
We find ourselves, Wolf Blitzer and my colleagues Bernie and Jeff and Michael Gerhardt, I think at a point that many of us thought we might never be at here in Washington, and that is only the second time in history a president of the United States has been impeached by a sitting Congress. And just a reminder before we take a very short break, the last time this happened, the only other time it happened, President Andrew Johnson survived a trial in the Senate by just one vote. We're going to take a break. We'll be back with more of these momentous events.
Tonight on a special live edition of Larry King Weekend, Reverend Robert Schuller looks at the historic impeachment vote with David Gergen and others. Tonight, 9 Eastern on CNN.
Smart Money just ranked us as one of the top 3 discount brokers, ahead of Schwab, E-Trade, Quick and Riley, and 16 others.
For big commission savings, guaranteed service, fast response, and so much more, call 1-800-257-5700.
If you're dissatisfied with a trade for any reason, that trade is commission-free.
Call now for free information. Plus, open an account and receive 50% off your first 3 trades.
Don't you think it's time to trade up to Siebert?
You've heard talk about satellite TV, right? Well, might sound great, but let's talk numbers. Here's some: 2, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9, 11, and 13. Those are channel numbers for some of our local stations that you don't get with direct broadcast satellite, but you do get with Comcast. And you know, we think that those local channels are important to our lives and to our communities. So be careful of the numbers that you miss out on with satellite. The numbers you've got because you've got Comcast.
Business Unusual with Lou Dobbs, tonight, 8:30 on CNN.
How does Martina track her true level of fitness? She uses Tanita's revolutionary body fat monitor scale to measure both her weight and body fat. To learn more, call 1-800-9-TANITA.
The days of wearing bulky protective undergarments are over.
all because of a revolutionary new product from Depend. Introducing disposable protective underwear. It combines a discreet, sure fit with a built-in super absorbent panel. It's the closest thing to regular underwear you can buy. So slim fitting, all that shows is your confidence. It's your life. Live it the way you want. New Depend protective underwear.
Get all you want out of life with Depend.
The Maglite flashlight. American made to be brighter, tougher, more dependable. The Maglite is a work of art that works. A Maglite flashlight is the brilliant gift idea for any occasion.
We're going to briefly catch you up on what is happening. First, taking you live to Baghdad. It is 10:30 at night in Baghdad. We had CNN correspondent Christiane Amanpour reporting a short while ago that the air raids sirens had sounded and the anti-aircraft batteries had opened fire. She also reported that the vice president of Iraq said that communications between southern Iraq and Baghdad have been cut. At a Pentagon briefing just concluded, Defense Secretary William Cohen said the airstrikes against Iraq were going to continue until President Clinton decides they are completed. Mr. Cohen also said, in his judgment, according to military officials in Washington, Saddam Hussein's missile program has been set back by at least 1 year. And also, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Hugh Shelton, reported that the Iraqis have not deployed any of their anti-aircraft missile systems, but he said that British and United States warplanes have encountered heavy anti-aircraft fire. On the floor of the House of Representatives, President William Jefferson Clinton, 42nd President of the United States, was this afternoon impeached on 2 articles, Articles 1 and Article 3. Articles 2 and Article 4 were defeated. Following that official business, the Republican chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, Henry Hyde of Illinois, moved to have the managers, the actual prosecutors in the Senate, appointed. Let's go now to the floor of the House. The vote continues now. It's called Resolution 614.
And this is the measure that Henry Hyde proposes to name 13 Republicans who would, in effect, manage the case against President Clinton in the Senate trial. And Bernie, we should say, we're just seeing here, CNN is reporting, both White House correspondent Chris Black and others are reporting that both outgoing Speaker Newt Gingrich and Tom DeLay, who is the whip, the House whip, higher up in the Republican hierarchy in the House, are both working to round up votes to elect Illinois Republican Dennis Hastert Speaker of the House. We're quoting one Republican source as saying he's locking up votes as we speak. They're describing Dennis Hastert of the 14th District of Illinois, which is in the Chicago suburbs. He's locking up. He is a healer, a consensus builder. He can bring Republicans together and put an end to this madness. End quote. Jeff Greenfield.
Just to fill in a couple of blanks, Hastert is he's 56 years old. He's a 12-year veteran of the House. And he comes from a solidly Republican district. He got 64% of the vote the last time. When he first ran for Congress, he was seen as insufficiently conservative, but I think he earned his spurs when he helped Tom DeLay get elected as majority whip of the Republican Party. So this may be yet another memorable reason to remember this memorable day.
His name actually came up during the initial search for someone to replace Newt Gingrich, but at that point it appeared that Bob Livingston had the votes he needed, and his name surfaced and then went away almost that quickly.
We want to go back briefly to the Pentagon briefing, portions of which we carried live, and then we cut back to what was happening. Early on, Defense Secretary Cohen and also General Hugh Shelton said that there's a problem, mainly General Shelton rather than Secretary Cohen, there's a problem with coming up with simple language to have us in the news media report what has happened on the battlefield, how to clearly report the assessment of damage. At one point, Secretary Cohen said, you can recall that during the bombing of the federal court building in Oklahoma City a couple of years ago, the word moderate was used to describe that damage. Well, Secretary Cohen said the damage created by British and U.S. forces has been substantial. Here now is just a portion of a briefing by Admiral Tom Wilson as he talks about the subject of substantial damage and which targets were damaged.
Without further ado, let's roll the camera footage.
Which night is this?
I think this was on night 2. This is Al Qut, F-14 GBU-12 laser-guided 1,000-pound bomb against the barracks and brigade headquarters of Republican Guard units in the Al Qut area. Second view.
Those are the same barracks.
Yeah, there's multiple aim points in the same barracks. That's correct.
Two GBUs?
Probably were more. We just showed 2 here. This is An Nasiriyah, a military cable repeater station, which is an important part of the integrated air defense and command and control network. And this is an FNA-18, also firing a GBU-12.
How many of these targets were struck during the Persian Gulf War? Are these all rebuilt since then, or are these struck in the first time?
We certainly struck.
Okay, that's another portion of the briefing from the Pentagon earlier this afternoon. Just to repeat, Secretary Cohen was asked a question about the duration when these airstrikes would end. He said that the operations are going to continue until President Clinton here in Washington decides that the mission is completed. Again, the American Pentagon official said that overall they feel that significant progress has been made in hitting targets.
Bernie, the House has completed its vote choosing 13 Republicans to manage the case against the president in the Senate. The ranking Democrat on the House Judiciary Committee, John Conyers, is talking with reporters right now. He objected to those, to naming those managers. Let's listen to him.
In the grand jury, where he has been charged under show cause for contempt for at least 24 instances of incorrect, overzealous, or flatly illegal conduct. Now, when you combine that to a almost textbook example of how not to conduct an impeachment inquiry in the House of Representatives, we then have a full-blown example of what not to do in impeachment. And in my view, Article 2, Section 4 impeachment is almost a dead letter from this point on. It will be very hard for people not to be suspicious of a political motive from this point on. Our investigation in the House of Representatives, in the Judiciary Committee, was biased, haphazard, and illogical. The chairman himself stated repeatedly from the outset that it had to be bipartisan, and then everything but bipartisanship occurred. It was partisan all the way. We were never sitting in the decision-making process as equals or as one committee, and in denying the president any semblance of fairness or due process, we in effect continued to build the support of the president and the animus to the Republican strategy, which has failed so miserably. My final observation is this. I have never seen a death wish so manifest in the political system of our country in my life. It is beyond comprehension that the leaders of the Republican Congress are not...
Bitter words coming from a Democrat, in this case John Conyers of Michigan, the ranking Democrat on the House Judiciary Committee. Let's skip over to the Republicans. They are making their voices heard as well. This is Georgia Republican Bob Barr.
It's possible that there indeed have been very serious abuses of power, obstruction of justice, and perjury committed by this president. I'm confident that as we now enter this final stage of this very sordid affair, and that is the trial in the Senate, that the American people will once again see the Congress of the United States, which are their representatives, perform very, very admirably, professionally, and of which the American people will once again be very proud as we bring this matter to a conclusion in the Senate.
Charles Kennedy. We are here today because of our Constitution. We are here because in America, no one, not even the president, is above the law. And we are here today because the facts of the case against President Clinton are overwhelming. Asa Hutchinson.
I'm here because there's a responsibility to perform and a duty to uphold. It's not a joyful occasion, particularly being from the president's home state, but I take this responsibility seriously, and I know that the Senate will follow the Constitution as we're all required to do.
Jim Rogan.
Watergate was a somber time for our nation also, and yet when the Congress demonstrated that the rule of law works for everybody, it became a healing time. Today, the Congress of the United States spoke through the House of Representatives that the rule of law applies to everybody. When the rule of law and the Constitution is defended, the end result really doesn't matter. The Constitution's been preserved, and we've demonstrated that by our vote today.
And finally, Lindsey Graham.
I think the sad thing for me is there's so many times before this could end it on a note of honor, and it just didn't happen that way. Now to end on a note of honor, you're going to have one of the most sophisticated juries in the world, some very smart men and women. I'm sure they'll do what they think is best for the nation. And if you think you know all there is to know about this case as the American public, please spend some time for the sake of your children and the future of this country to follow this trial if one is had, because I think you'll learn a lot about the facts you don't know now.
Now, let me say that the next thing that we're going to do, and we don't have time for questions, is that we will be walking the articles of impeachment over to the Secretary of the Senate. So I would ask my colleagues to go back upstairs. The Secretary of the Senate is waiting to do something that has not happened since 1868. So thank you.
What was your reaction to the resignation of Mr. Livingston?
They need to stay on this side of the program. They need to stay on this.
What you're seeing is a picture of some buses carrying Democratic members of the House. We were told originally it was just the House leadership, but evidently it's more than that now. Democrats from the House traveling from the Capitol all the way down Pennsylvania Avenue. I can't quite tell at this point what route they're taking, to the White House, where they will meet with the president in private, and then the group of them will step out onto, we've been told, step out into the Rose Garden, and they will make a statement. CNN's Washington Bureau Chief Frank Sesno is here with us. Frank.
Judy, very interesting. As these Democrats go over to the White House, need to tell you about some of the maneuverings behind the scenes taking place among the Republicans. I am told by people very familiar with the situation, you've heard some from Bob Franken, and our Chris Black has reported in on this as well, but I'm told that Newt Gingrich, upon seeing Bob Livingston's resignation, put his staff and his allies, such that he still controls, into action to try to secure the next speakership for Dennis Hastert from Illinois. That is very much underway right now. There was some discussion of trying to pull the caucus back today to do that, Judy. Probably won't happen until Monday because they need to get the new members in town. This man is described as somewhat grandfatherly. The Republicans clearly described as in turmoil over this loss of the next speaker, and they want to put it behind them.
Frank, again, as we watch these buses carrying Democrats to the White House to have a private meeting with President Clinton, what about the calls on the part of several people for Bob Livingston to reconsider? You had several Democrats, President Clinton, saying you shouldn't do this.
It's a non-starter. There's not sentiment in the Republican Party for this among the base, the core constituency. Many of them raised questions about that.
Why not?
Because there are some within the party who feel that this was deserved, and there's some consideration that there are a number of complex reasons behind Livingston's decision. Maybe all of them we're not familiar with. But on Hastert, one person who's very familiar with these players says, using the carpentry analogy, Judy, if Tom DeLay is known as the hammer, Dennis Hastert will be the level.
Well, for those of us who don't know carpentry, what does that mean?
It means that he is a leveling influence. It means that he is calm. It means that after all of this turmoil, the Republican Party is very anxious to put a calm face forward.
All right, Bob Franken, our congressional correspondent, is listening carefully to all this as we watch those buses make their way down the streets of Washington to the White House. Bob?
Expand on what Frank was saying. First of all, what they want to do is to try and get everybody together Monday if they can. It is Christmas week, and the decision may be that the new members, and for that matter the other members of the Republican group, are too far flung to do it before January. But there's going to be an effort to make Dennis Hastert happen. Secondly, not only is Newt Gingrich's staff working on this, but Tom DeLay, who is the very powerful Republican whip. Dennis Hastert was one of his very important deputies. Tom DeLay is very close with him, and so there will be a very close relationship between the man who it looks like is going to become, at this stage it looks like anyway, the new Republican Speaker of the House. One other point, if you don't mind, referring back to something that Congressman Sensenbrenner just said in his news conference. The history continues to be made. The Republican managers of impeachment are probably at this very moment crossing over into the Senate side of the Capitol, putting the impeachment matter in control of the Senate and beginning the process which could be the trial, which could result in the conviction for President Clinton.
You mean literally at this moment they're carrying the paper over to the Senate?
At the end of the news conference, Sensenbrenner said that we have to leave now. We have to take the material over to the Senate. The impeachment process is continuing as it is scheduled to, and this afternoon, if not this second, certainly within the next few minutes, the material will be taken physically over to the Senate side.
And we were just handed a statement from Trent Lott, Bernie, just a moment or two ago, saying this is getting underway. In effect, the senators take this obligation seriously, and he said that we can't predict when the trial is going to happen, but the process is set in motion.
And on the point that Bob Franken was making about the two approved articles of impeachment making their way to the Senate, Mr. Sensenbrenner, the ranking Republican on the House Judiciary Committee, said at one point as he walked away from reporters, we're getting ready to do something that has not been done since 1868.
As those buses carrying the Democrats from the House make their way to the White House, we're going to take a very quick break and come right back.
When you had the idea, you were just a kid. But lately you've had to buy into some pretty adult stuff, like strategies for attracting and retaining the best employees and maximizing shareholder value. At Arthur Andersen, we help people make those kinds of decisions, which lets them concentrate on things like transforming complex three-dimensional objects into simple digital data. You know, kid stuff. Arthur Andersen, helping in ways you never imagined.
At Zales, the diamond store, you can get this beautiful half-carat diamond channel band for just $1.99. And right now, get 12 months interest-free. Forever starts today with a diamond from Zales. At Zales, the diamond store, you can get this exquisite 7-carat diamond bracelet for just $14.99. And right now, get 12 months interest-free. Forever starts today with a diamond from Zales.
Someday there will be no subways or corporate ladders to climb. If retirement is a bridge to be crossed when we get there, then we must accept whatever lies ahead of us. If it is one we must build, then let us begin.
You are looking at the northwest gate of the White House where protesters are gathered. Lest we forget, there's another huge story underway at this hour, and that is military action against Iraq. There are protesters gathered there outside the White House who say that this is a wrongful action. They're against the military action. While they are marching there in a circle, you have Democratic members of the House of Representatives making their way to the White House on buses. And we are told they're going to have a private meeting with President Clinton. One has to assume it'll be in the nature of a pep rally, and after that the president will step outside and make remarks, and this has to be the gravest day of his presidency. Back to the Capitol now, where CNN's Candy Crowley is with a Democratic senator. Candy? Candy? Senator Leahy, Patrick Leahy of Vermont, are you there?
I am there, and I'm on. I can hear you.
Wonderful. I will go ahead and talk to you. We had a little bit of guidance that Candy was there too. We want to ask you.
Yeah, Candy is here, but we're having a little bit of a microphone problem, and I think I may have her microphone.
All right. Well, clearly this has been a day that we knew was coming. We knew that at least one of these articles of impeachment would pass. Now 2 of them have passed. What happens when this gets to the Senate, Senator?
I suppose the easy answer is nobody knows. If you went solely by the Constitution, it would be at whatever point we determined to have them come over, and that's something to be worked out between the House and Senate leadership. You start the trial. And it would be a very solemn undertaking. Every senator has to take a separate oath of office to even be in the trial before it starts. And as you know, the Chief Justice presides over it. But I suspect that the reality is that there's going to be an attempt one more time to see if there is some way of ending this with censure, something that apparently the majority of Americans would prefer to happen. Nobody's approved of the president's conduct, but the majority of Americans say let's have censure rather than conviction under impeachment. If that was done, the Senate could, for example, pass a censure motion, and a very strong one, and then have the House not send managers over with the impeachment. The president would have been impeached by the House, but not gone to trial in the Senate.
Senator, you say that despite the fact that the Senate Majority Leader, Republican Leader Trent Lott, is saying that as far as he's concerned, this trial is going to get underway.
Well, of course, the Republicans can determine that. I mean, they have the majority in the Senate, and if the Republicans say this matter should go to trial, then it will go to trial. But most Republicans and Democrats I've talked with say no matter which way they might vote on the question of conviction, based on the facts they've seen so far, most feel that there would not be a 2/3 vote to convict. And so a number of senators in both parties have said, at least quietly and privately, that they wish there was some way to avoid having a trial at all. If you're going to have a trial that will tear the country apart for months and then have it end with no conviction, why not start in the first place and do what the majority of the country want, that is have a motion of censure. But I would add, just like in the House, it will be whatever the Republicans want it to be. And in a way that's unfortunate. I don't say it in a partisan way, because on a question of impeachment, for the country to find it credible, it has to be bipartisan. So far, it has been highly partisan. I would hope that the Senate and the Senate leadership can step back, take a deep breath, and say, is there a way of doing this in a bipartisan fashion?
Do you think a trial would tear the country apart?
I think the trial would have a very real possibility of that. For one thing, very little else would go on in government. The president would be totally absorbed in it, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and the Senate would be. On a question that many feel would not reach the bar of impeachment. We're not saying that the actions of the president were good actions. They were wrong. They were bad actions. But the issue is, do they reach the level of impeachment? And if they don't, then the country is going to question what's going on. It also would instill even harsher partisanship in a Congress that during the past 2 years has been almost paralyzed by partisanship. I mean, how are you ever going to face the consensus necessary to take care of the problems with Social Security, or with health care, or with our financial status vis-a-vis the Asian markets and other places. I mean, none of that consensus is going to be there.
Senator, we want to point out the picture, the aerial picture that our viewers are seeing is of the area right around the White House, the buses holding members from the House, Democratic members from the House who've come to see the president. They've arrived, and one assumes they'll be getting out, going in, and meeting privately with the president. Jeff Greenfield, you had a question for the senator.
Yes, Senator, this is a peculiar institution in which you are a juror, but you're a juror in what is supposed to be an inherently political event. Have you determined that this is not an impeachable offense? We know that Senator-elect Schumer is already on record. We know how he's going to vote. I think we know how many people are going to vote. Have you told us, or your constituents, more importantly, how you're going to vote?
No, I have not. And if we go in, if I take that oath of office as a juror, I can truthfully say I will take that oath with an open mind. I mean, I was a prosecutor. I've presided a lot of trials. If I take that oath, which I will, I'll do it with an open mind. What I am saying, though, is most constitutional writers on this have said this does not reach the level of impeachable offense. Basically, this trial will be different than just the kind of criminal trials that I had when I was a prosecutor there. You know, you have did you break this law or didn't you break this law? Here, you add a political dimension to it. Is it worth overturning a presidential election?
Senator, this is Bernie Shaw. Pardon my interruption. Just want to point out to you and our viewers that you're outside the Secretary of the Senate's office. They are bringing over from the House of Representatives the documents attached to the two articles of impeachment voted just a short while ago in the House of Representatives. James Sensenbrenner, one of the senior Republicans, said that they were about to do this. Not since 1868 has this been done, and they should be arriving very, very shortly. We'll keep our eyes on that scene just outside the Secretary's office.
But in 1868, that was a highly partisan effort, and the president was acquitted.
I'm just going to say, before we go back to you, Senator, and want you to listen to this, and that is that we're told that the Secretary of the Senate, Gary Sisko, will receive these documents, presumably containing the articles themselves, and will sign where it's indicated that the Senate has formally received them. This is not a process that wastes much time.
No, it's not. But you still have to have, after the new Congress comes in, you have to reappoint managers and send them over. That is when a trial would actually begin. As Bernie pointed out, this hasn't happened since 1868. But in 1868, as we know, the country was almost split apart because of a highly partisan impeachment trial, which ended in the acquittal of the president.
That rush of young men you saw coming through the door there were not members of the House. They're the so-called press pool. This is a representative group of photographers and others who are going to be taking pictures and then sharing them with the rest of the news organizations.
This is one thing that we didn't see in 1868, I think, is where the media basically dominates the visuals of sort of tells the world what's going on. Which, Senator, I wonder how you feel about the fact that this trial, if it takes place, might well be on television. What's the impact of that, do you think?
I think it would be entirely different as our proceedings are now. The interesting thing under our rules, though, our deliberations are supposed to be behind closed doors. If we're going to have the trial on television, we ought to change our rules and have our deliberations on television also.
If I may, that's a significant point I think most of us don't know. When you actually argue the guilt or innocence of President Clinton, we will not, that's secret. Everybody's thrown out, television cameras are off, and then you come and tell us how you voted, right?
The rules are the doors are locked. I mean, literally locked, and you go forward and deliberate it. Now, that's a rule we can change. I think that there would be pressure to change that. I think the American people ought to know how each one of the, because this is partly political as well as fact gathering, how each one of the 100 senators deliberate and how they vote. Because, you know, this is there's only 100 of us to represent 250 million people. That 250 million people, I don't know how we're representing them.
Senator, When will you get your first opportunity? You talked about your past, having been a former prosecutor. When will you, a member of the United States Senate, sitting in judgment of the two articles against the president, when will you get a chance to go in to the room and sit down and begin to look at the documents?
I suspect we can begin to do that very, very soon. As a practical matter, it'll probably be after we come back in on the 6th. But these are among the procedures that we're going to have to work out. The Rules Committee and others will have to work out just how we do it before we even begin a trial. Because once the Chief Justice administers that oath, sits down, trial starts, I don't think the Senate's going to be doing much of anything else.
You're flagging that you think that the Senate is going to be paralyzed?
No, I think the Senate's going to be focused on that trial.
Mr. Chairman, welcome. Thank you.
Sure.
Quite an extraordinary scene here. Henry Hyde himself, James Sensenbrenner of Wisconsin, several other. This looks to be perhaps all 13 of the managers just voted on by the House. These are the Republicans in the House who will literally manage the case against President Clinton.
Mr. Secretary, by direction of the House of Representatives and pursuant to House Resolution 614, I hereby deliver these articles of impeachment. Would you hold this? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir.
As Secretary and on behalf of the Senate, I accept these into the official record of the Senate for deliberation later on.
Thank you.
And we thank you for your courtesy in coming over.
Not at all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very well. Thanks.
I was going to say, Bernie, clearly this is not something that's done with every piece of legislation.
No, I was just thinking that the only difference, well, there are many differences, but one of the prime differences between this picture and 130 years ago is the dress, Jeff Greenfield.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. I have to say, I realize that we preempted Elsa Clench on Saturday, but I hadn't thought about the stylistic implications. If I may, what's going to happen now is that the actual business of transporting these articles to the full floor of the Senate takes place next year when the new Senate convenes. I think it's January 6th. And when those are brought physically into the Senate by the House managers, the next day is when the actual proceedings, including the Chief Justice of the United States, coming to the United States Senate, that's when all that begins.
Well, if that's the case, why all this today?
Because procedurally, they're supposed to go immediately from one house to the other.
But you're saying they have to do it again when the new House is constituted.
They have to come over to the Senate. This is very formal. I mean, it's parliamentary procedure that's borrowed in some sense from Britain. They have to come in January, but they have to take these articles of impeachment and physically bring them into the body of the Senate, read the articles formally, and that triggers the one-day notification to the Chief Justice and the commencement of the what would then be pretrial business.
Speaking of physical movement, the Democrats supporting the leader of their party have transported themselves from the Hill to the White House. John King, it seems that they went on the east side, entered the east side of the White House on what was Madison Avenue formerly, and they're inside now?
The majority of them are here, Bernie. Some still arriving and coming through the gates. They're going into the White House residence. They'll meet privately there with the president first and then come out onto the south lawn on the other side of the White House from where I'm standing for a little bit of a pep rally. The main point of that rally, Democrats standing by the president to show their resolve and to make the case that he should not step down, that this was a Republican partisan impeachment vendetta, in the words of White House officials, and that the president should fight on. I want to give you a snapshot of what the president was doing as these historic events unfolded. As we reported a short time ago, the president was in the Oval Office with one of his spiritual advisors. He was not watching when the first article of impeachment was passed by the House of Representatives, making him, of course, only the second president in history to be impeached. But since then, we've been told by our sources that shortly after that vote, the president went into the dining room, the private dining room near the Oval Office. He met there with Doug Sosnick, one of his top political advisors, and John Podesta, the White House Chief of Staff. As the three of them were in there talking, they watched the votes on Articles 2, 3, and 4. At one point during that discussion, again, while the president was watching these votes unfold, another one of his top aides, Steve Ricchetti, a former legislative aide, about to become the #2, the deputy chief of staff here, walked in as well to give the president an update on the mood from the voting on the House floor. At that point, we're told, the president told, these are his top political aides now, told them that he was not surprised by this vote, that he was certainly disappointed, but that despite his disappointment, he was determined to press on to seek a bipartisan solution. Now, the importance of that, of course, as you've been talking with Senator Leahy in the recent moments, is the president trying to make the case here that this should not go to trial in the Senate, that there should be some sort of a plea bargain. That trial would have to convene under the rules for that to take place. But between now and when the Senate comes back into session in January, the White House will